The world of Alaris had never known war. It was not that the Elorans were incapable of violence. Like all living things, they understood survival, understood fear, understood the instinct to protect what was theirs. But somewhere in the long quiet history of their species, they had made a different choice. Not a single moment, not a grand declaration, but 1,000 small decisions across generations that slowly shaped who they became. They chose to build instead of conquer. They chose to listen instead of dominate. They chose to endure instead of destroy. And over time, those choices became identity. Alaris itself reflected that identity in every detail. From orbit, the planet glowed in soft shades of blue and green, its oceans wide and calm, its landmasses covered in layered forests that shimmered under the light of a pale golden star. The cities were there, but they did not scar the landscape. They curved with it. They breathed with it. There were no towering spires meant to intimidate the sky. No vast industrial scars cutting through the continents. The Elorans built low, wide structures of smooth stone and living materials that adapted with time, growing slowly alongside the world rather than replacing it. At night, their cities did not blaze with artificial light. They glowed. Soft lines of bioluminescent pathways traced through the streets, gentle pulses of color marking movement, life, presence. From above, it looked less like civilization and more like a living network, something organic and calm, something that belonged exactly where it was. The Elorans themselves were not large. Their forms were slender, their movements unhurried. Their voices, when they spoke, carried a natural softness, not from weakness, but from a cultural instinct that had never found value in shouting. Conflict, when it happened, was quiet. Resolved through councils, through long discussions, through patience that other species often mistook for hesitation. They were not naive. They knew the galaxy beyond their system was not like them. For 180 years, Alaris had been a member of the Galactic Assembly, a vast network of civilizations bound together by treaties, trade, and shared law. The Assembly was powerful. Its fleet spanned sectors. Its influence reached into nearly every known region of space. It was, in every official sense, protection. And the Elorans believed in it. They attended the assemblies. They signed the agreements. They contributed what they could: knowledge, agricultural innovations, medical research refined over centuries of studying life without harming it. They were not a major power. Not politically. Not militarily. Their defense fleet was small, designed more for patrol and deterrence than for war. But that had never concerned them. Because they were not alone. That was the foundation everything rested on. If danger came, the assembly would respond. If a member called for help, help would arrive. That was the agreement. That was the promise. And for nearly 2 centuries, that promise had held. Alaris had remained what it had always been: quiet, steady, untouched by the kind of violence that shaped so many other worlds. On the morning the first warning reached their orbital monitors, the rivers were running slow and bright under the early light. Children were walking along the curved garden paths toward their learning halls. Farmers were tending the layered terraces at the edges of the cities. The air carried the faint scent of flowering trees that only bloomed during that narrow seasonal window. It was, by every measure, an ordinary day. Peaceful. Certain. Unquestioned. And like all such days, it ended the moment something appeared at the edge of their system. Not a signal. Not a message. Not a request. Just ships. Hundreds of them. Moving in silence through the dark. The first ships were dismissed as an error. That was the official record later, though no one who had been in the monitoring station truly believed it. The Elorans were careful by nature. Their systems were redundant, their sensors precise, their analysts trained to notice even the smallest irregularity. But what appeared on the outer edge of their detection grid did not fit any expected pattern. It was too large to be debris, too structured to be a natural phenomenon, too silent to be a standard approach. For 6 minutes, the readings sat there, unresolved. Then they multiplied. What had first appeared as a single anomaly separated into distinct signatures. 1 became 3. 3 became 12. 12 became dozens. The sensor array recalibrated automatically, adjusting its range, refining its resolution, trying to make sense of what it was seeing. By the time the system finished correcting itself, the number had stabilized. 312. 312 individual vessels, moving in perfect alignment, crossing into the Alaris system without a single transmission. No identification. No declaration. No warning. Just movement. The name reached the Central Command within minutes. The Karth Dominion. Even spoken quietly, it carried weight. They were not unknown. No one in the assembly could claim ignorance of the Karth. For nearly 4 decades, their expansion had been a slow, methodical pressure at the edges of civilized space. Not chaotic. Not reckless. Precise. They did not raid. They did not threaten. They did not negotiate. They identified a target. They calculated the outcome. And then they moved. 12 systems had fallen to them in 32 years. Each one different. Each one unique in culture, in technology, in strength. Some had fleets larger than anything Alaris had ever built. Some had defensive networks that spanned entire orbital shells. It had not mattered. The pattern was always the same. The Karth arrived. Resistance formed. Signals were sent. Help was requested. And then, nothing came. There were records. Quiet ones. Archived reports buried deep in assembly databases, written in the neutral language of diplomacy. Situation under review. Military response under consideration. Strategic implications require further assessment. By the time those assessments were complete, there was nothing left to respond to. On Alaris, the realization spread slowly. Not because the information was hidden, but because it was difficult to accept. The Karth Dominion was not supposed to be here. Their expansion vector had never pointed toward this region. There were other systems closer, richer, more strategically valuable. Alaris was peripheral. Peaceful. Politically insignificant. There was no reason to come here. And yet, the ships kept coming. High Counselor Virel stood in the central observatory, watching the live projection of the system map unfold in front of her. She was older than most in the room, her movements measured, her expression composed in the way that came from decades of governance. She had attended assembly sessions. She had spoken with representatives of powerful civilizations. She understood how the galaxy worked. Or she had believed she did. Confirm trajectory, she said. A technician at the lower console responded immediately. Trajectory confirmed. All vessels are maintaining direct course toward Alaris Prime. No deviation. No hesitation. Direct. They haven't sent a communication. Virel asked. No, Counselor. Not even an automated identification ping. No, Counselor. The room fell quiet. Silence, in most situations, was neutral. Here, it meant something else. It meant certainty. Virel stepped closer to the projection. The ships were still distant, hours away from effective engagement range, but their formation was already visible. Not scattered. Not exploratory. Structured. A forward compression line, dense at the center, tapering outward at the edges. It was not a formation designed to probe defenses. It was designed to break them. They've already decided, one of the analysts said quietly. No one asked what he meant. Everyone understood. Virel kept her eyes on the projection. 312 ships. Alaris had 41 defensive vessels. Most of them were patrol class. Open a channel to the assembly, she said. Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. But something in it shifted, just slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Priority level. The communications officer asked. Virel did not look away from the incoming fleet. Maximum, she said. A pause. Then, more quietly. And mark it as a system-wide distress call. Around her, the room came alive. Signals began routing. Frequencies opened. Long-range transmitters aligned toward the network hubs that connected the assembly's vast communication grid. Protocols that had existed for centuries, rarely used, but always maintained, activated one by one. This was what they were for. This was why the assembly existed. Far out in the dark, the Karth fleet continued its approach. Unhurried, unchallenged, unstoppable. And for the first time in its history, the world of Alaris was no longer certain that peace was something that could protect it. The distress signal left Alaris in perfect clarity. It was not rushed, not chaotic. The Elorans did not panic, even now. Their message was structured, precise, and unmistakable in its intent. We are under imminent threat. Hostile fleet identified. Karth Dominion. Projected engagement window. 27 hours. Requesting immediate military assistance under Assembly Accord 7.3. Every required protocol was followed. Every identifier verified. Every channel opened. The signal was transmitted across all major assembly frequencies, routed through priority relays, tagged for immediate escalation. It was, in every sense, a textbook emergency call. And for the first few minutes, there was relief. Because the system responded. Signal received, said the communications officer. On the main display, confirmation pings began to appear. One by one, the great powers of the assembly acknowledged the message. The Thalran Collective, received. Reviewing. The Auric Dominion, signal logged. Forwarding to Council. The Vishari Union, emergency request acknowledged. Even the Central Assembly Hub returned confirmation. Distress signal verified. Council notified. In the observatory, a quiet breath moved through the room. It was working. The system was working. Virel allowed herself a single, small nod. Maintain transmission cycle, she said. Repeat every 12 minutes. Keep all channels open. Yes, Counselor. Hours passed. The Karth fleet moved closer. On the projection, their formation expanded slightly, adjusting as they entered deeper into the system. Not slowing. Not altering course. Just refining. Any updates? Virel asked. The communications officer hesitated. Then, yes, Counselor. The Assembly has responded. The room stilled again. Display it. The message appeared in clean, neutral text across the central screen. Galactic Assembly Council response. Your distress signal has been received and verified. The situation is currently under active review by the Council. A formal response will be issued within the standard emergency evaluation window. Virel read it once. Then again. How long is the evaluation window? Someone asked quietly. The communications officer checked the protocol index. 48 hours. No one spoke. Because everyone in the room had already done the calculation. Time to engagement. Virel asked. 23 hours, Counselor. 48 hours. 23 hours. The numbers did not align. There must be a secondary channel, one of the analysts said quickly. A direct escalation path, something that bypasses Council review. There is, the communications officer said. We used it. And? A pause. They confirmed receipt. Silence settled into the room again, heavier this time. Not confusion. Understanding. Virel turned back to the display. The Karth fleet had crossed another boundary marker. Their forward line was now clearly defined, their approach vector narrowing as they aligned for orbital positioning. They were not waiting. Send another message, Virel said. The communications officer looked up. Counselor, we've already. Send it again. Her voice was still calm, still controlled. But there was something else in it now. Something sharper. Priority override. Direct address to all Assembly military commands. Not the Council. The fleets. A flicker of hesitation. That would be outside standard protocol. Virel finally turned. For the first time since the ships had appeared, her gaze moved away from the projection and settled fully on the people in the room. Do it. The message was shorter this time. Less formal. Alaris is under direct threat. Karth Dominion fleet inbound. We will not survive without immediate assistance. If any Assembly member has the capacity to respond, respond now. No legal language. No structured phrasing. Just truth. They sent it. Across every frequency, every relay, every known contact point. And then, they waited. The responses came. Not all at once. Not in a wave. One by one. The Thalran Collective replied first. We acknowledge your situation and express our deepest concern. The matter will be raised at the next full council session. Next session? Someone whispered. The communications officer checked. In 6 days. The Auric Dominion sent a longer message. While we sympathize with your circumstances, direct military intervention without unified council authorization risks destabilizing the region. We strongly advise pursuing diplomatic alternatives. Diplomatic. The analyst stopped himself before finishing the sentence. There was nothing to negotiate. Some did not respond at all. The Vishari Union sent a final note. We regret that our fleets are currently engaged in critical operations and cannot be redeployed at this time. One by one, the confirmations stopped. The channels quieted. The transmission logs stabilized. No ships. No reinforcements. No change in the Karth approach. In the observatory, no one moved for a long time. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because, for the first time, they understood that what they were doing did not matter. Virel stood in front of the display, watching the incoming fleet. 312 ships. Now less than 20 hours away. Behind her, the communication systems continued their cycle, repeating the distress signal into the vast network of the assembly. The same message. Over and over. Requesting help. Across the galaxy, it was received. Logged. Acknowledged. Filed. And quietly. Ignored. Virel closed her eyes for a single moment. Not in despair. Not in fear. Just, in recognition. Then she opened them again. Begin evacuation protocols, she said. Because the system they had trusted for 2 centuries had just given them its answer. And it was silence. The announcement was made without urgency. That was the Eleran way. Even now. Evacuation protocols are now in effect. Please proceed to your assigned shelters in an orderly manner. Assistance will be provided where needed. The message carried across the cities in soft, steady tones. No alarms. No sharp edges. Just calm instruction, repeated at measured intervals. But calm did not mean confusion. Everyone understood. The streets began to change. Not suddenly. Not chaotically. The Elerans did not run. They did not shout. They moved the way they always moved, deliberate, aware, controlled. Families stepped out of their homes carrying only what they could hold. Small things. Necessary things. Children walked beside their elders, hands held tightly, eyes searching the sky without fully understanding what they were looking for. The bioluminescent pathways that usually pulsed gently beneath their feet now glowed in steady lines, guiding movement toward the underground shelters built long ago for emergencies no one had ever truly believed would come. In the agricultural terraces at the edge of the capital, workers paused in their tasks. Some of them finished what they were doing. Not because it mattered, but because stopping felt wrong. Along the river paths, the long curves of water reflected the sky as they always had, catching the light, turning it into something soft and gold. For a moment, it looked unchanged. As if nothing beyond the horizon had shifted. In orbit, the defense fleet assembled. 41 ships. They rose from their stations one by one, engines igniting in quiet bursts of light, forming a loose perimeter around the planet. It was not a strong formation. It was not meant to be. It was everything they had. Commander Salan stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, watching the incoming data scroll across his display. 312 hostile ships. Now less than 16 hours away. He did not speak for a long time. Around him, his crew worked in silence. Systems checks. Weapons alignment. Shield calibration. Procedures they had trained for, but never expected to use like this. One of the younger officers glanced toward him. "Sir, do we hold position?" Salan kept his eyes on the display. "Yes," he said. A pause. Then, more quietly, "We hold." There were no speeches. No declarations of victory. No illusions about what would happen when the Karth fleet arrived. They all knew. On the surface, the shelters began to fill. Long corridors carved into the earth, lined with soft lighting and reinforced walls. Designed for storms. For geological instability. For temporary refuge. Not for invasion. Inside, the air was quiet. People sat close together. Some spoke in low voices. Some said nothing at all. A child asked a question that no one answered. High Counselor Virel moved through one of the larger shelters near the central district. She did not wear her formal robes anymore. Just a simple uniform, unmarked, unadorned. People recognized her anyway. They stepped aside as she passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. Some inclined their heads slightly. Others reached out, not to stop her, not to ask anything, just to touch her sleeve for a brief second as she walked by. A silent exchange. We see you. We understand. At the far end of the shelter, she stopped. A large viewing screen had been activated, connected to the orbital sensors. The image was distant, grainy, but clear enough. Points of light. Hundreds of them. Moving. Virel stood there for a long time, watching. Not speaking. Not reacting. Just witnessing. Behind her, the shelter continued to fill. Above her, the defense fleet held its fragile line. And beyond that, the Karth Dominion moved closer. There is a moment, in the space between certainty and impact, where everything becomes very still. Not because time slows, but because there is nothing left to decide. Ilaris had made every choice it could make. It had called for help. It had followed the system. It had trusted the promise. And now, there was nothing left but to wait. In orbit, Commander Salan adjusted the positioning of his fleet by a fraction, tightening the formation as the incoming signatures grew brighter on his display. He exhaled slowly. Maintain readiness, he said. On the surface, in the quiet shelters beneath the living cities, the Elorans sat together in the dim, steady light. Holding hands. Speaking softly. Waiting. And in the dark between stars, 312 ships continued their silent approach. No one was coming. Or at least, that was what the galaxy had decided. The signal continued. Even after the responses stopped. Even after the channels went quiet. Even after it became clear that no one was coming, the transmission cycle did not end. Every 12 minutes, exactly as programmed, the Eloran distress call pulsed outward into the dark. We are under attack. Karth Dominion fleet inbound. Time remaining limited. Requesting immediate assistance. It repeated across all known frequencies. Clean. Precise. Unchanged. In most places, it passed unnoticed. Logged by automated systems. Filed into databases. Assigned to queues that would be reviewed later. Later, when it no longer mattered. Far from Ilaris, at the edge of a minor relay sector, a station received the signal. It was not an important station. It did not handle major diplomatic traffic or military coordination. Its primary function was routine, trade confirmations, navigation updates, low-priority communications that kept the background of the galaxy moving smoothly. The kind of place where nothing urgent ever happened. Lyra didn't expect anything urgent. She had been at her console for nearly 6 hours, reviewing standard transmissions, flagging minor irregularities, clearing backlogged reports. It was quiet work. Predictable work. She liked it that way. The Ilaris distress signal arrived at her station 11 minutes after its latest broadcast. It appeared like any other priority-tagged message. Highlighted, categorized, automatically sorted into the emergency queue. Lyra opened it out of habit. She read it once. Then again. Her fingers hovered over the console. Karth Dominion, she murmured softly. She knew the name. Everyone did. She pulled up the attached data. Trajectory confirmed. Fleet size verified. Time to engagement. Her eyes paused on the number. 14 hours, she whispered. She leaned back slightly in her chair. Then, without hesitation, she reached for the escalation controls. The system interface shifted, opening the higher priority routing channels. Not the standard relay. Not the delayed review queue. The direct line. She keyed the transmission. Forwarding distress signal to active command priority, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The system processed the request. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a notification appeared. Request denied. Signal already logged by Assembly Council. Status. Secondary priority. Lyra stared at the screen. Secondary, she repeated. She pulled up the Assembly Response database. The record was there. Ilaris. Distress signal received. Status. Under review. Priority classification. Secondary. Her gaze shifted back to the timer. 14 hours. She had been doing this job long enough to understand what those words actually meant. Under review meant delay. Secondary priority meant unlikely. It meant someone, somewhere, had already decided. Lyra sat still for a long moment. Then she minimized the official response window and reopened the raw signal feed. The transmission from Ilaris was still cycling. Still repeating. Still asking. She watched it update in real time. Each repetition slightly weaker as it spread further into the network, diluted by distance, absorbed by systems that were no longer paying attention. One by one, the response logs stabilized. No new acknowledgements. No rerouted commands. No fleet movements. The galaxy had moved on. Lyra reached toward the console to close the feed. Her shift was nearly over. There was nothing left for her to do here. The system had made its decision. Her finger hovered over the control. Then, stopped. A new entry appeared. Small. Almost invisible against the stream of data. An acknowledgement ping. Not from the assembly. Not from any registered member civilization. Lyra frowned slightly and opened it. Probably a relay echo, she muttered. Those happened. Signals bouncing off distant stations, returning as fragmented confirmations that meant nothing. But something about this one. She checked the timestamp. And went very still. The Ilaris signal had been broadcast. She checked again. Then ran the calculation. 4 minutes, she whispered. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Her eyes flicked to the distance markers. That was not possible. No relay in that region could return a signal that fast. Not at that range. Not with current infrastructure. Which meant, this isn't an echo, she said quietly. She pulled up the source coordinates. The system processed the data slowly, cross-referencing old star charts, outdated survey logs, fragments of information that had never been considered important enough to update. The location resolved. Outer sector. Low development zone. Sparse records. One inhabited system. Lyra leaned closer to the screen. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Who? She opened the archived file. Minimal data. Brief classification. Species, human origin world, Earth status. Minor civilization development level, early interstellar. Lyra read it once. Then again. Minor. Insignificant. Barely noted in assembly records. Her gaze shifted back to the acknowledgement ping. No message attached. No diplomatic language. No formal response. Just a single line, encoded in standard deep space protocol. Signal received. Understood. Acting. Lyra's hand stopped moving. She stared at the word. Acting. Not reviewing. Not discussing. Not assessing. Acting. She looked at the timestamp again. 4 minutes. Then, slowly, she opened a new calculation window. If a vessel had received the signal at that timestamp. If it had turned immediately. If it had already begun moving. Her fingers moved across the console. Distances. Speeds. Known propulsion limits. The number appeared. Lyra blinked. Then recalculated. The result did not change. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. At the coordinates. At the word. Acting. Far away, in a part of the galaxy no one paid attention to. Something had heard the call. And without asking permission. Without waiting for approval. It had already started moving. Lyra did not close the window. Her shift timer blinked softly in the corner of the console, indicating that her rotation had officially ended 3 minutes ago. Normally, she would have logged off immediately, filed her reports, handed over the station, and left the quiet hum of the relay behind without a second thought. But her hands remained still. Her eyes fixed on a single line. Acting. She opened the assembly database again, pulling up the file on the species listed in the ping. Humans. The record was thin. A short entry, compiled decades ago and barely updated since. Species name, human homeworld, Earth location, outer Orion arm status, minor civilization technological tier, early expansion military presence, limited political influence, negligible. Lyra frowned slightly. That's it, she murmured. She scrolled further. There were no major treaties. No significant trade routes. No recorded large-scale conflicts beyond their own system. A handful of exploratory colonies. A few research outposts. Minimal interaction with the broader assembly. They were, by every measurable standard, irrelevant. And yet, she glanced back at the timestamp. 4 minutes. That kind of response time meant one thing. They hadn't hesitated. Lyra leaned forward, pulling up long-range movement projections. If a ship had already begun accelerating at the moment the acknowledgement was sent. If it maintained maximum propulsion. Her fingers paused above the console. They're not sending a message, she whispered. They were sending something else. She ran the projection again, adjusting for variables, drive efficiency, possible shortcuts, unregistered relay routes. Even with optimistic estimates, the result remained the same. They won't make it in time. The words left her quietly, almost automatically. Ilaris had less than 14 hours. Even the fastest ships in known space. Her eyes flicked back to the coordinates. To the origin point of the ping. Unless, she murmured. She opened a secondary database, older records, incomplete surveys from exploratory missions decades ago. The Orion outer sectors were poorly mapped. Not because they were dangerous, but because they had never been considered important enough to prioritize. There were gaps in the data. Entire regions labeled as low activity or non-essential. Earth's system sat inside one of those gaps. Lyra zoomed in. Outdated star charts. Fragmented notes. Scattered observations. Nothing that suggested advanced infrastructure. Nothing that suggested anything unusual. And yet, she looked at the timestamp again. 4 minutes. That wasn't just fast. It was decisive. She sat back slowly, her thoughts shifting. The assembly had taken hours to respond. The major powers had taken longer. Some had not responded at all. And this minor, barely recognized species, had answered in 4 minutes. Not with sympathy. Not with protocol. With action. Lyra felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was attention. She minimized the database and returned to the live signal feed. Ilaris was still broadcasting. Still repeating its call into the dark. We are under attack. We need help. Most of the galaxy had already decided what that message was worth. But somewhere, far beyond the edges of the maps anyone bothered to update, something had heard it. And decided differently. Lyra opened a secure log and began recording everything. The timestamp. The coordinates. The exact phrasing of the acknowledgement. She didn't know why. No one had asked her to. No protocol required it. But something about this felt important. As if she were watching the very beginning of something that the rest of the galaxy had already missed. Far away, beyond her sensors, beyond her charts. Beyond even the limits of what the assembly considered relevant. Engines had already ignited. Not slowly. Not ceremonially. But with the kind of speed that came from a decision already made. No debate. No hesitation. No approval required. Just a direction. Toward Ilaris. Toward a signal that no one else had answered. Lyra stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, quietly, to no one at all. They're actually coming. And for the first time since the distress signal had been sent. The silence of the galaxy didn't feel absolute anymore. It felt interrupted. The Ellerans did not know. Not yet. On Alaris, the shelters remained full, the cities above them quiet, the defense fleet holding its fragile line against an enemy that continued to advance without interruption. High Counselor Virel had returned to the observatory. She stood where she had stood before, watching the projection of the system unfold in slow, inevitable movement. The Karth fleet had closed to within 10 hours. "Any changes?" she asked. The communications officer hesitated. Then, "There is one anomaly, Counselor." Virel turned slightly. "Define anomaly." The officer pulled up a secondary display. A single external acknowledgement. Not from the assembly. Not from any registered member. The data appeared: timestamp, coordinates, signal origin. Virel read it once. Her expression did not change. "Is it verified?" she asked. "Yes, Counselor." "Content." The officer paused. Then read it aloud. "Signal received. Understood. Acting." The room was silent. Virel looked at the coordinates. Earth. The name meant very little to her. She had heard it once, distantly, in passing, one of the many emerging civilizations catalogued by the Assembly. Minor. Young. Uninvolved. "They responded in 4 minutes?" she asked. "Yes." Virel turned back to the projection of the incoming fleet. 312 ships. "And what are they sending?" she asked. The officer hesitated again. "We don't know." That was the truth. There were no additional transmissions. No fleet signatures detected. No evidence of movement, yet. Just a message. Acting. Virel studied the word in silence. "Continue monitoring," she said finally. She did not ask further questions. Because there were none that could be answered. Whatever Earth was. Whatever they intended. It would not arrive in time. And so, like everything else, it became something to acknowledge. And then set aside. But far away, on a different world, in a different time. The reason had already been written. New moon symbol 96 years earlier. Earth had not always been quiet. Not in the way it was now. There had been a time when humanity was still new to the stars. Curious. Expanding. Uncertain. They had built their first colonies quickly, too quickly, some would later say, pushing outward before they fully understood the risks that waited beyond their own world. The outbreak began on a mining station. At the edge of their early expansion network. At first, it looked small. Localized. Manageable. A cluster of workers reporting fatigue. Minor neurological disruptions. Unusual cellular degradation patterns. By the time the first containment team arrived, it had already spread. The pathogen did not behave like anything human science had encountered before. It adapted. Not randomly. Intelligently. It learned. Standard treatments failed. Quarantines failed. The disease moved through stations, then ships, then worlds. Within months. It reached Earth. Hospitals filled. Research facilities operated without pause. Entire regions shut down under emergency containment measures. Projections were calculated. Then recalculated. Then quietly revised downward as reality outpaced expectation. 30% mortality within 2 years, one report stated. Possibly higher. Humanity did what it always did. It fought. Every lab. Every scientist. Every available resource. And still, it wasn't enough. So they turned outward. Requests were sent. Not as demands. As appeals. To the Assembly. To every known civilization with advanced biological research. The responses came. "We acknowledge your situation. We express our concern. We will review the data." Time passed. More people died. The responses did not change. No ships arrived. No direct assistance followed. Only messages. Sympathy, carefully worded. Concern, professionally delivered. Humanity was not yet important enough. And then, without warning, a transmission arrived. No formal introduction. No diplomatic preamble. No request for recognition. Just data. A massive package of biological research. Detailed. Precise. Focused on immune system pathways that matched the pathogen's behavior almost exactly. It came from Ilaris. At the time, the name meant nothing to most humans. It was just a designation attached to a data header. But the research worked. Not immediately. Not perfectly. But it gave them something they had not had before. A direction. Within weeks, progress accelerated. Within months, treatment stabilized. Within a year, the death rate began to fall. 70,000 lives saved in the first year alone. More after that. The outbreak did not vanish overnight. But it stopped winning. And eventually, it ended. Humanity survived. They sent a message. A thank you. A formal acknowledgement. Ilaris responded once. We are glad it helped. Nothing more. No request for compensation. No mention of the cost. Because there had been a cost. The assembly had noticed. Ilaris had acted outside official channels. Shared restricted research without approval. There were consequences. Trade agreements reduced. Political standing lowered. Quiet penalties applied over time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. Just less. And Ilaris accepted it. Without protest. Without explanation. They did not defend their decision. They did not justify it. They simply continued being what they had always been. And over time, the galaxy forgot. But humanity didn't. They archived everything. The data. The origin. The consequences. They watched. Not actively. Not loudly. But consistently. For 96 years. They watched as Ilaris faded quietly into the background of assembly politics. Watched as their influence diminished. Watched as the system they had trusted treated them as expendable. And they remembered. Not as a debt. Not as an obligation. As something simpler. Someone helped us. That was enough. Milky Way present. On Ilaris, the shelters remained quiet. The fleet held its line. The Karth ships moved closer. And far away. In a system most of the galaxy still considered irrelevant. A decision that had been made nearly a century ago. Was finally being acted on. Not because it was required. Not because it was strategic. But because it was remembered. And for humanity. That mattered. More than policy. More than permission. More than consequence. It always had. The order was given without ceremony. It did not echo across a crowded hall. It was not broadcast to inspire. No speech followed it. Prepare for deployment. That was all. On Earth, it was early. The rotation had just begun over the Atlantic regions, the first light of morning touching the edges of the oceans, reflecting softly across the planet's surface. Cities were waking slowly. Transit systems beginning their cycles. People moving through routines that had been built over generations of relative stability. Above it all, in orbit. Things moved faster. The signal had reached command 6 minutes after it left the relay network. Not because it was prioritized. But because it was noticed. Admiral Cale Arden was already awake when it arrived. He had been reviewing logistics reports in a quiet operations room, the kind that never fully powered down, screens glowing in low light, data moving in steady, controlled streams. When the duty officer entered, there was no urgency in his step. Just focus. Sir, he said, handing over the transcript. Arden took it. Read it once. Then again. He did not ask who else had received it. He already knew the answer. Everyone had. Response? He asked. The officer hesitated. Assembly is reviewing. No fleet movement detected. Arden nodded once. A small, almost invisible motion. How long? He asked. Estimated engagement in 11 hours. Arden looked at the coordinates. Ran the distance in his head. Calculated the window. Then he set the transcript down. Wake the fleet, he said. The room shifted. Not dramatically. But noticeably. Yes, sir. There was no discussion of authorization. No mention of assembly protocol. No request for external clearance. Because none of that applied here. Within minutes, the command network activated. Signals moved outward from Earth, not in a single burst, but in a controlled cascade, targeted, precise, reaching every vessel within rapid deployment range. Orders were simple. Full readiness. Immediate assembly. Priority transit. No explanations attached. None needed. Across orbital docks, ship interiors, and distant patrol routes, crews received the same message. They read it. And they moved. No one asked why. Because most of them already knew. Rocket the ships. The UES Vanguard powered up first. A carrier-class vessel stationed in high orbit, its systems already maintained at near-operational status. Lights shifted across its hull as internal systems came online, hangar bays unlocking, personnel moving into position with quiet efficiency. The UES Horizon line followed. A long-range strike ship, built for speed over distance rather than sustained combat. Its engines ignited in controlled bursts, stabilizing output, preparing for immediate acceleration. Then others. Destroyers. Frigates. Support vessels. Not assembling slowly. Not gathering for inspection. Moving. Each ship completing its checks independently. Each crew already familiar with what came next. There were no delays. No hesitation. Because this was not new. Man # plane # the people. Commander Elias Vaughn was in the middle of a simulation cycle when the order reached him. He didn't finish it. Didn't pause to review the results. End exercise, he said. His team looked up. No confusion. Deployment? One of them asked. Vaughn nodded once. Real one. That was enough. Across the ship, systems transitioned from training mode to live configuration. Weapons armed. Navigation recalculated. Crew positions locked in. Dr. Myra Chen received her notification in the research wing. She read it quickly, then opened the system database, pulling up everything available on Alaris. There wasn't much. But she read all of it. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand who they were going to help. In engineering, Chief Rylan Ortiz was already working. He had seen the alert before it reached full command priority. He always did. By the time the official order came through, the engines were already being prepared. 3 hours, he told his team. Everything at full capacity. No one argued. Because they all understood the same thing. Speed mattered. Milky Way the assembly. Across the wider galaxy, the movement did not go unnoticed. At multiple relay stations, logs updated. Unusual fleet activity detected. Origin, Earth. Scale, significant. Analysts flagged it. Filed it. Marked it for later review. Because while it was unusual, it wasn't urgent. Not yet. Gear # the difference. On Earth, the preparation was not loud. There were no declarations broadcast to the public. No visible panic. No dramatic shifts in daily life. Because this was normal. Not the situation. But the response. When a signal came in, you answered. That was not policy. Not written in any official doctrine. It was something else. Something older. Something that did not require discussion. Rocket the assembly complete. 6 hours after the initial order. The fleet was ready. Not partially. Not in stages. Fully. Hundreds of ships, positioned in coordinated alignment just beyond Earth's primary orbital ring. Engines active. Systems synchronized. Navigation locked. Admiral Arden stood on the command deck of the UES Vanguard, looking out across the formation. He did not speak immediately. He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said already had been. Coordinates confirmed, the navigation officer reported. Jump corridor stable. Arden nodded. Execute. There was no countdown. The ships moved as one. Engines ignited. Not in a single flash, but in sequence, each vessel entering the corridor with precise timing, slipping out of real space in controlled bursts of light. One. Then another. Then another. Until the space around Earth was empty again. Quiet. As if nothing had happened. Shooting star and ahead. Far across the distance. Ilaris waited. The shelters full. The fleet holding. The enemy closing. No one on that world knew. Not yet. That somewhere in the dark between stars, a force had already begun moving toward them. Not because it had to. Not because it was ordered. But because they had asked. And for humanity, that had always been enough. The Karth Dominion did not rush. They never had. From the command deck of the Dominion warship Iron Vow, High General Kraith observed the system in silence. Ilaris turned slowly beneath him. Green, quiet, untouched. For now. Distance to engagement threshold, he asked. 4 hours, the sensor officer replied. Kraith nodded once. There was no urgency in the room. No tension. Only routine. Because this was familiar. He had led 9 campaigns personally. Each one different in detail. Each one identical in outcome. A civilization identified. A system entered. Resistance measured. Eliminated. It was not cruelty. Not, in his mind. It was function. The galaxy was not balanced. Power did not distribute itself evenly. Some species rose. Others did not. The Karth simply clarified that process. Defensive capability. Kraith asked. The tactical display shifted, highlighting the Eleran fleet. 41 ships. Light class. Poorly armed. Minimal, the officer said. Kraith studied the formation. Loose. Unrefined. They will attempt to hold orbit, he said. Yes, General. They will fail. There was no arrogance in the statement. Only certainty. Because they always did. New moon symbol the pattern. Kraith had seen this stage before. He understood it better than most. This was the moment. The quiet one. The moment when a civilization realized that help was not coming. It always followed the same sequence. First, hope. Signals sent. Channels opened. Trust placed in systems larger than themselves. Then, delay. Responses received. Words exchanged. Time lost. Then, understanding. No ships. No reinforcements. No change. Just silence. And silence, in war, was louder than anything else. Kraith turned slightly, looking back toward the sensor array. Any external movement? He asked. None detected. Of course not. There never was. Globe showing Europe-Africa below. On Ilaris, the sky had changed. It was no longer empty. From the surface, the Karth fleet was now visible. Small points of light against the dark, moving slowly, steadily, growing brighter with each passing hour. In the shelters, people watched through external feeds. Some stood. Some Saturday. Some turned away. No one spoke loudly. Because there was nothing left to say. Rocket in orbit. Commander Salan adjusted his fleet's position again. A small shift. Barely noticeable. It didn't matter. He knew it didn't matter. But he did it anyway. Because doing something was better than doing nothing. Final readiness check, he said. Acknowledgements came back, one by one. Quiet. Controlled. No fear in their voices. But no illusions either. Milky Way the unknown. At the edge of the system. Something changed. It was small. So small that the first sensor pass flagged it as background noise. A fluctuation. Recalibrate, the operator said. The system adjusted. The fluctuation remained. Then, it repeated. Once. Twice. The operator frowned. Run diagnostic. Systems are stable. He leaned closer to the display. What is that? The signal sharpened. Resolved. 1 contact. Then. 5. Then. More. The system struggled to categorize them. shifting from individual tracking to grouped signatures as the numbers increased faster than it could process. The operator's voice changed. "General." Kraith did not turn immediately. "Report." The officer swallowed once. Multiple incoming signatures at extreme range. Unknown configuration. Kraith stepped forward. "How many?" The display updated. Numbers rising. 30, 50, 100. The system paused. Then recalculated. Grouping. Consolidating. A single number appeared at the top of the screen. It updated once. Then again. Then stabilized. 487. Silence filled the command deck. Kraith stared at the number. "Identification," he said. The communications officer ran the query. Data streamed. Cross-referenced. Matched. Then. Origin. Earth. The word settled into the room like something out of place. Kraith frowned slightly. Earth. He searched his memory. A minor entry. A young species. Insignificant. He looked back at the display. 487 ships. Arranged. Not in a defensive arc. Not in a standard engagement line. But in something else. A pattern he did not recognize. "Open channel," he said. The line activated. "This system is under Karth Dominion authority," Kraith said, his voice steady, controlled. "You are entering an active military zone. Identify your purpose and withdraw immediately." A pause. Short. Then. A response. A woman's voice. Calm. Clear. "This is Admiral Cale Arden, United Earth Defense Command." Another pause. Perfectly measured. "We're here because someone asked for help." Silence. Then. "You have 20 minutes to withdraw." No anger. No threat in tone. Just certainty. "After that," she said, "we act." Kraith stood very still. He had heard threats before. Many. From stronger civilizations than this. He had dismissed them. Calculated risk. Advanced. One. But this felt different. Not because of the words. Because of the formation. Because of the number. Because of the fact that they had come at all. "Hold position," he said finally. Not retreating. Not advancing. Watching. Calculating. Because for the first time in a long time, the pattern had changed. And Kraith did not yet understand how. Far above Ilaris. The two fleets faced each other. One built on certainty. The other. On something the galaxy had never properly measured. And between them. 20 minutes. The 20th minute passed in silence. No movement from the Karth fleet. No withdrawal. No attempt to reposition. On the bridge of the UES Vanguard, Admiral Arden watched the tactical display without expression. Hundreds of red markers, Karth vessels, held in dense formation around Ilaris. 487 blue markers, human ships, spread in a controlled perimeter just beyond engagement range. "Status?" she asked. "Enemy holding position," Commander Vaughn replied from tactical. "Formation unchanged." Arden nodded once. "They think we're posturing," Vaughn added. "I know," she said. She leaned forward slightly. "Execute." Crossed swords hashed the first move. What happened next did not follow any recognized doctrine. The Earth fleet did not advance. It did not form a unified front. It did not concentrate its firepower into a single overwhelming strike. Instead, it broke. Not into chaos. Into design. 487 ships split. Not into two groups. Not into three. Into 12. 12 independent formations, each one moving in a different direction at the exact same moment. To an untrained observer, it might have looked like disorder. Like hesitation. It wasn't. It was intent. The groups accelerated outward, curving around the Karth formation from every possible angle. Some moved above the orbital plane. Others dropped below it. Several pushed wide, extending far beyond what would normally be considered effective engagement distance. They weren't closing in. They were surrounding. The problem. On the iron vow, Kraith watched the movement unfold. For the first time since entering the system, he frowned. "This is not an attack formation," one of his officers said. "No," Kraith replied. "It wasn't. And that was the problem. Reorient the fleet," he ordered. "Break central formation. Establish intercept vectors." The commands went out. But the Karth fleet was not built for this. Their ships were designed for direct engagement. Massed force. Linear dominance. They moved best as one. Splitting them. Slowed them. High-voltage signed speed. The first human ship struck before the Karth fleet completed its reorientation. Not from the front. From 3 directions simultaneously. Precision strikes. Fast. Targeted. Not at shields. Not at armor. At seams. Points of structural weakness identified in real time by scanning systems that had been analyzing Karth ship design since the moment they arrived. The first explosions were small. Then, they weren't. A Karth destroyer lost power along its port side, its shielding collapsing unevenly before a second strike hit the exposed section and tore through it. Another ship spun out of formation, engines destabilized by a targeted hit to its propulsion core. "Adjust defense grid," Kraith ordered. But the grid was already wrong. Counterclockwise arrows adaptation. Every time the Karth ship shifted, the humans shifted faster. 12 groups moved independently, but not randomly. They reacted to each other. Adjusted constantly. A Karth counterformation began to form. Then collapsed before it could complete. Group 7, shift left. Vaughn's voice echoed across the fleet channel. "Don't let them establish that angle." The ships moved instantly. Group 3, widen arc. "You're closing too tight." They adjusted. There was no delay. No confusion. Just execution. Water wave the difference. From the surface of Alaris, the battle looked unreal. On the shelter screens, the Karth fleet, once a solid mass, was being reshaped. Not destroyed outright. Broken apart. The human ships didn't crash against it like a wave. They flowed around it. Finding gaps. Expanding them. Turning structure into vulnerability. A young Eleran watching the display whispered. "They're not fighting them." High Counselor Virel, standing beside her, answered quietly. "They're taking them apart." Crossed swords hash resistance. The Karth were not helpless. Their weapons were powerful. Their ships resilient. When they managed to lock onto a human vessel, they hit hard. A frigate, UES Arrowfall, took a direct strike to its forward section, shields collapsing under concentrated fire. "Arrowfall hit," someone called. The ship veered, stabilized, and pulled back, systems damaged but functional. Another vessel wasn't as fortunate. A destroyer, caught between 2 converging Karth ships, took simultaneous hits to its midsection. For a moment, it held. Then, it didn't. The explosion was brief. "Clean. Gone. Confirmed loss," Vaughn said quietly. Arden didn't respond. Her eyes remained on the display. Because the pattern was still holding. The trap. 3 hours into the battle. The shape changed. Not suddenly. Gradually. The 12 groups had been moving outward. Circling. Pressuring. Now, they began to close. Not as one, but as a system. Each group adjusting its position by fractions. Angles tightening. Distances shrinking. The Karth fleet responded. Too late. By the time Kraith understood what was happening, it was already done. Lock the realization. He stood at the center of the command deck, staring at the tactical display. Every escape vector. Blocked. Every movement path. Covered. His fleet. 300 ships still operational. Was enclosed. Not surrounded in the traditional sense. Contained. A sphere of human vessels, positioned with exact precision, closing in from every direction. Not crushing. Controlling. Kraith exhaled slowly. "They've been guiding us," he said. No one replied. Because it was obvious. Every movement they had made. Every adjustment. Every response had been anticipated, used, turned against them. Scales hashed the decision. Kraith had not survived 9 campaigns by ignoring reality. He looked at the display, at the formation, at the ships that had come from nowhere, and rewritten the battlefield in 3 hours. Then he made a decision. Open fleet-wide channel, he said. The line activated. All vessels, he said, his voice steady. Disengage. A pause. Then, full withdrawal. Milky Way, the end of the battle. The Karth fleet broke formation. Not in panic. In retreat. Ships turning outward, pushing for the edges of the system. The human fleet did not pursue. They held position, maintained structure, watched, until the last Karth vessel crossed the boundary of the system. Then, and only then, they stopped. Globe showing Europe-Africa below. On Ilaris, the lights in the sky began to fade. One by one, the points of threat, becoming distance, becoming nothing. In the shelters, no one spoke, because no one fully understood what they were seeing. Not yet. But they understood one thing. The fleet that had come to end them was gone, and the ones who had driven it away had not even stayed to celebrate. They simply held the line, as if that had been the only goal all along. Above, on the Iron Vow, Kraith stood in silence as the last of his ships cleared the system. He replayed the battle in his mind. The formations, the movements, the decisions. Nothing about it had been random. Nothing about it had been standard. And nothing about it had been weak. Earth, he said quietly. This time, the name felt different. Not minor. Not insignificant. Unknown. And that was worse. Because unknown things could not be predicted. And things that could not be predicted could not be controlled. For the first time in 30 years, the Karth Dominion had not won. And they did not know how to fix that. Far behind them, Ilaris remained. Untouched. Alive. Because when they had called for help, someone had answered. And that answer had changed everything. The silence after the battle felt different. Not empty. Not uncertain. Safe. On Ilaris, the shelters began to open. Slowly. Carefully. People stepped out into the light with hesitation still lingering in their movements, as if the sky above them might change its mind if they moved too quickly. But it didn't. The air was still. The cities still stood. The rivers still moved. And above, the stars were no longer filled with threat. They were filled with something else. Ships. Hundreds of them. Holding position in quiet orbit. Not advancing. Not demanding. Waiting. Globe showing Europe-Africa the first contact. High Counselor Virel stood at the base of the central communication tower. She had not slept. None of them had. Beside her, a small delegation waited. Scientists. Advisors. Observers. And above them, a single shuttle descended. It did not rush. It did not display power. It arrived. Softly. The landing was precise. Controlled. The hatch opened. A woman stepped out. She was not armored. Not surrounded by a visible show of force. Just present. Commander Elias Vaughn followed a step behind her, along with one additional security officer who remained deliberately unobtrusive. The woman approached. Stopped at a respectful distance. Then inclined her head slightly. "My name is Admiral Cale Arden," she said. "United Earth Defense Command." Her voice was calm. Measured. Virel returned the gesture. "I am Virel of Ilaris." A pause. Neither of them rushed to fill it. Because there was no need. Teacup with handle the conversation. They met inside the tower. A simple room. No ceremony. No formal display. A table. 2 chairs. A drink was offered. Accepted. For a while, they spoke of practical things. Medical support. Repair assistance. Orbital stabilization. The human fleet had already begun deploying aid. Quietly. Efficiently. Not waiting to be asked. But eventually, the practical conversation ended. And something else remained. Virel studied Arden for a moment. Carefully. You responded faster than any assembly member, she said. Arden didn't reply immediately. You acted without authorization, Virel continued. The political consequences for that will not be small. Still. No reaction. Virel leaned forward slightly. We are not a strategic asset, she said. Not militarily. Not economically. Her voice remained calm. But there was something beneath it now. We have nothing to offer you that justifies what you did. A pause. I would like to understand why you came. The room went quiet. Arden looked at her. Not evaluating. Not calculating. Remembering. New moon symbol the truth. For a long time, Arden said slowly. We didn't think anyone would. Virel said nothing. We were younger then, Arden continued. Not as stable. Not as prepared. Her gaze shifted briefly. Not away. But inward. We had a crisis, she said. A biological one. Virel's expression didn't change. But her attention sharpened. It spread faster than we could contain it, Arden said. We asked for help. A small pause. We received acknowledgements. The word lingered. Concern. Sympathy. Review. Virel understood. No one came, Arden said. Silence. Then. A data package arrived. Virel's hands, resting lightly on the table, became very still. No introduction, Arden said. No request. Just a solution. The room felt smaller. It worked, Arden continued. Not immediately. But enough. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't change. It saved us. Virel lowered her gaze slightly. We were penalized for that, she said quietly. Arden nodded. We know. That word. We know. It carried weight. We've been watching, Arden said. Since then. Virel looked up again. Watching, she repeated. Arden nodded. You helped us, she said. You didn't have to. A pause. You didn't ask for anything. Another pause. You didn't even tell anyone. The silence between them deepened. For 96 years, Arden said. We remembered. The words settled slowly. Not as a declaration. As a fact. Broken Heart Black Right Arrow #fire the answer. Virel's voice, when it came, was softer. We didn't do it expecting anything in return. I know, Arden said. And she did. That's why it mattered. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Full. We thought. Virel began, then stopped. She tried again. We thought no one noticed. Arden's expression didn't change. We did. That was all. No speech. No explanation. Just truth. Milky Way outside. Above Alaris, the human fleet remained in orbit. Ships moving slowly. Repairing. Stabilizing. Not leaving. Waiting. Because that was part of it too. Not just answering the call. Staying. Until it wasn't needed anymore. Inside. Virel sat back slightly in her chair. For the first time since the Karth ships had appeared. She allowed herself to feel something she had kept carefully contained. Not relief. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something steadier. We are, in your debt, she said. Arden shook her head. No, she said. A small pause. We're even. Virel studied her. Then. Slowly. She nodded. Because some things didn't need to be argued. They just needed to be understood. And in that quiet room, between two species that had helped each other across nearly a century without ever expecting anything in return, they were understood. The galaxy did not change overnight. It never did. The assembly continued its sessions. Resolutions were drafted. Discussions were held. Committees reviewed what had already happened, carefully analyzing decisions that had already cost entire civilizations their existence. Alaris was added to the agenda. Not as a tragedy. As a complication. There were questions. About protocol. About authority. About precedent. A minor civilization had intervened in a major conflict without approval. A developing species had altered the balance of power in a region that had been predictable. Some called it reckless. Some called it dangerous. No one called it ineffective. Because the result remained. Ilaris still stood. And the Karth Dominion had not returned. Milky Way the silence that followed. In the months after the battle, something subtle began to shift. Not loudly. Not in declarations or treaties. In hesitation. The Karth fleet did not advance into new systems. Not immediately. Their movements slowed. Their patterns changed. For the first time in decades. They paused. Because somewhere in their calculations, a new variable had appeared. Unpredictable. And in war, unpredictable was dangerous. Globe showing Europe-Africa on Ilaris. The cities recovered. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But steadily. The burned terraces were replanted. The damaged structures rebuilt. The shelters, once filled with fear, returned to quiet emptiness. Life resumed. Not as it had been before. Something had changed. Not in the world itself. In the way it understood the galaxy around it. The promise of protection had broken. But something else had taken its place. Not a system. Not an agreement. A choice. The ones who saw. In a quiet office on a distant relay station, Lyra submitted her resignation. No announcement. No explanation. Just a completed form, filed with the same precision she had applied to everything else. She had watched the signal. Watched the responses. Watched the silence. And then watched something answer anyway. That had been enough. Rocket the ones who changed. On Earth, the footage spread. Not as propaganda. Not as celebration. As record. The arrival. The formation. The battle. 487 ships moving in perfect coordination toward a world they had never seen. For people they had never met. A 9-year-old girl watched it in her room, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes as the fleet emerged from the dark in synchronized motion. She didn't understand the strategy. Didn't understand the politics. But she understood this. They came. She replayed it. Again. And again. Because something about it felt like truth. Shooting star the pattern. On the edge of known space, the UES Vanguard resumed its patrol route. The crew returned to routine. Maintenance cycles. Training rotations. Quiet conversations in low-lit corridors. As if nothing had changed. Because for them, it hadn't. Not really. High voltage sign the next signal. It came weeks later. Different coordinates. Different species. Different voice. The message was imperfect. Fragmented. But the meaning was the same. We are under attack. We need help. On the bridge, Admiral Arden read it once. Then she looked up. Set course, she said. No meeting. No debate. Just action. Milky Way the truth that remained. Across the galaxy, systems would continue to rise and fall. Empires would calculate. Councils would deliberate. Power would shift. That would not change. But something else had entered the pattern. Something quieter. Something that did not wait for permission. The final line. Because there was one species. Young. Imperfect. Still learning. That had decided something a long time ago. Not as policy. Not as law. As identity. That when a voice called out into the dark, you answered. Not the second call. Not the safe call. The first one. And the one after that. And the one after that. No matter the cost. No matter the distance. Because somewhere, at some point, someone had done the same for you. And that was enough. The galaxy debates. Humanity answers.